Picture this. Your 12-year-old son has been missing for 11 days. The FBI is involved. The Detroit Police Department is involved. Cadaver dogs have searched your home. The whole city is watching. The whole country is paying attention. And you, the father, have agreed to go on one of the most watched true crime shows on American television to talk about your missing child. You are sitting across from Nancy Grace. Cameras are rolling. Millions of people are watching live. And while you are sitting in that studio, while the cameras are pointed at your face, while you are answering questions about your missing son, police are back at your home executing a search warrant. And they find him in the basement of the house you just left. This is the story of Charlie Bothel IV and the 11 days that exposed one of the most brazen acts of deception in Detroit true crime history. A father who called police to report his own son missing, who went door to door in his neighborhood asking people to help find the boy, who sat on live national television and played the role of a devastated parent, while that same boy was hidden underground in his own home the entire time. If the story is new to you, buckle in, because not one single detail of what you are about to hear makes any logical sense. If you have been following Black Veil Crime Files, you already know what we do here. We do not leave anything out. We do not soften the edges. We follow the evidence all the way to the end, no matter where it leads. Hit that like button right now. Share this video immediately because every share puts this story in front of someone who has never heard it. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications turned on because the cases we cover do not stop moving. And stay until the very last second of this video because the courtroom moment at the end is something you absolutely need to hear with your own ears. Let us begin. Who is Charlie Bothel IV? Charlie Bothel IV is a registered nurse from Detroit, Michigan. By all outward appearances, he was a man who had built a respectable life. He had a medical career. He had a home. He had a family. He had a son. That son was Charlie Bothel V, 12 years old, a child. Charlie IV was also married to a woman named Monique Dillard, the boy's stepmother. The three of them lived together in a townhouse on Nicollet Place near Lafayette Park on the east side of Detroit. Now, before we get to the 11 days that changed everything, you need to understand the environment that Charlie V was living in inside that home. Because the missing person case did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the end of a much longer story that investigators would only begin to fully understand after the boy was found. Charlie V had struggled with his weight. His father, a registered nurse with medical knowledge and strong opinions about health, had placed the boy on a strict diet. No fried foods, a structured exercise program, an elliptical machine, a routine that was monitored and enforced. The stepmother Monique later wrote in a statement to police that she had caught Charlie shortchanging his workout, skipping portions of the routine, not completing what had been required of him. In her own words, she wrote that it was her belief that Charlie no longer wanted to face his father about being in trouble, and that rather than be confronted about respect and personal responsibility, he would rather leave. That statement, written by the stepmother to explain why a 12-year-old child had allegedly run away from home, would later become one of the most chilling documents in this entire case. Because what she described as a child running away from accountability was, investigators would eventually conclude, something else entirely. The disappearance. June 2014. In June of 2014, Charlie Bothel IV and his wife Monique called the Detroit Police Department to report that their 12-year-old son Charlie was missing. The family said Charlie had run away from home. The reason given was that he had been told to do exercises and did not want to do them. That was the story. A 12-year-old boy vanished into thin air because he did not want to get on an elliptical machine. The case immediately drew significant attention. Detroit police launched a search. The FBI joined the investigation. Volunteers combed the neighborhood. Search teams went door to door across the surrounding streets. And Charlie Bothel IV was right there in the middle of all of it. Visibly, publicly, he went door to door himself, knocking on neighbors' doors, asking people to help find his son. He spoke to reporters. He appeared in front of cameras. He played every note of the grieving, desperate father with complete conviction. He agreed to take a polygraph test. Reports later indicated that the results were inconclusive. Police requested a consensual search of the property. The father agreed. Officers came in. They searched the home. Canine units followed a scent trail from the house all the way to nearby Lafayette Park. And then, according to investigators, the scent went cold. They found nothing. The boy was not there. But during that consensual search, officers found something that shifted the entire direction of the case. They found blood. Blood in the boy's bedroom. Blood on his clothing. And now the calculus changed completely. Because a child who runs away from home does not leave blood behind in his bedroom and blood on his clothes. And the question that every investigator was now asking out loud was the question that nobody wanted to answer. What actually happened to Charlie Bothel V? The search warrant and the Nancy Grace appearance. The blood changed everything. Police went to a judge and obtained a full search warrant for the Bothel family home. This was no longer a consensual walkthrough. This was a formal law enforcement search of a property where investigators now believed a possible homicide had occurred. Now here is where this case takes a turn that you will not find in many true crime stories. Because police made a deliberate decision. They wanted to execute that search warrant while Charlie Bothel IV was not at home. They wanted him out of the building while they searched it. And conveniently, Charlie IV had already made plans that would take him out of the house. He had agreed to appear on the Nancy Grace show. Nancy Grace was at that time one of the most watched true crime television programs in America. Millions of viewers. Live broadcast. The kind of platform that a parent of a missing child might genuinely seek out to draw attention to the case and keep their child's face in front of the public. Or, as investigators were beginning to wonder, the kind of platform that a person might use to perform grief publicly while something else was happening in their house. While Charlie Bothel IV sat in a studio in New York with cameras pointed at his face, police entered his home in Detroit with a search warrant. They had cadaver dogs. They had been to this location before. They had searched it before. And they had found nothing before. But this time was different. One of the cadaver dogs stopped. His body went rigid. Then it sat down. The alert that every handler in that building had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. They found Charlie Bothel V in the basement of his father's home. Alive. 11 days after he was reported missing. Hidden in a makeshift concealed area that the police chief himself would later describe as something the boy could not possibly have constructed alone. The police chief stood in front of reporters and said something that became one of the most quoted lines of the entire case. He said he was not certain that Charlie had been in the basement during any of their previous visits. He said they had come to that location 4 times. They had brought cadaver dogs. And they were not certain the boy was there on those previous occasions. Let that land for a moment. The boy may have been moved, hidden elsewhere, and then returned. The live television moment that stunned the entire country. Back in the studio in New York, Charlie Bothel IV was mid-interview with Nancy Grace when someone passed a note or a wire report to the production team. Nancy Grace interrupted the segment. She turned to the man sitting across from her, the man who had been talking about his missing son, and told him that they were receiving reports that his son had been found, alive, in the basement of his home. The response that came out of Charlie Bothel IV's mouth in that moment is something that millions of people have watched and rewatched and cannot fully explain. What? Just that one word. Flat. Stunned. Or performing stunned. Depending on what you believe. Nancy Grace repeated it. Yes. We are getting reports that your son has been found alive in your basement. What? Again. The same word. The same delivery. How could your son be alive in your basement? I have no idea. 4 words. And with those 4 words on live national television, in front of millions of viewers, the entire performance collapsed. Because here is what the Detroit police chief said publicly immediately after the boy was found. He said he hoped that someone would interrupt the Nancy Grace show to tell Charlie IV the news. He said, and this is a direct description of what was reported, that Charlie IV should know that the location he had just left, his own home, was where his son had been found. Downstairs. The implication was clear to every person who heard it. The police chief was not delivering warm news to a relieved father. He was describing a man who had just left a house where his son was hidden and gone on television. And when a reporter asked whether the mother had disappeared and whether investigators found that odd, the police chief's response was 3 words: "I find a lot of things odd." What was in that basement? When investigators fully processed the basement of the Bothel family home, they found several things that became central to the criminal case that followed. They found Charlie V, bruised and showing visible signs of physical abuse. Doctors who examined the boy found bruising and marks on his body consistent with repeated physical harm. They found what the police chief described as a makeshift area of concealment, a constructed space, something deliberately built or arranged to hide a person. And the chief said clearly and publicly that there was no way the 12-year-old boy could have constructed that concealment area himself. Someone else built it. Someone with the ability and the access and the intention to hide a child from the police officers, the FBI agents, and the cadaver dogs that had been to that location multiple times. And then there was the other thing investigators found in that basement. A marijuana grow operation. Rows of plants. A full cultivation setup underground in the same space where the boy had been hidden. An FBI agent called to the stand by the defense during the subsequent trial confirmed it directly under oath. Rows that were part of a grow operation. A marijuana operation for cultivating plants. Right there beneath the family home. Now investigators were not primarily focused on a personal grow operation. But the presence of that operation in the same concealed basement where a child had been hidden told its own story about what kind of environment existed in that house and what kind of secrets had been kept inside it. Charlie V later told investigators what had been happening to him. He told them that his father regularly hit him with a PVC pipe. He told them that it was his stepmother Monique who had ordered him to stay hidden in the basement. Not his own choice. Not a runaway. Ordered. By the adults in his home. An 11-day-old child abuse concealment disguised as a missing person case. And the father had been going door to door in the neighborhood the whole time. The charges. Charlie Bothel IV and Monique Dillard were both arrested and charged with felony child abuse and torture. Torture. That is not a word the criminal justice system uses casually. Torture as a criminal charge in Michigan carries a potential sentence of life in prison. The charges reflected not just what had happened during those 11 days in June 2014, but what investigators concluded had been happening to Charlie V over a much longer period of time. The father and stepmother stood side by side at their arraignment, both charged, both facing the full weight of what investigators had uncovered in that basement and in the medical examination of the boy. Charlie Bothel IV, the registered nurse, the man who had gone on Nancy Grace, the man who had knocked on his neighbor's doors asking for help finding his son, was now facing a life sentence. The courtroom. I did not object. When it came time to go to trial, Charlie Bothel IV made a decision. He agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors. He would plead guilty to 4th-degree child abuse, a lesser charge than the torture and 2nd-degree child abuse he had originally faced. In exchange, prosecutors would agree to dismiss the more serious charges. The sentence would be a term of probation and other conditions to be determined by the court. But to accept that plea deal, Charlie Bothel IV had to do something very specific. He had to stand up in open court in front of a judge on the record and say out loud what he had done. The exchange in that courtroom is one of the most striking moments in this entire case. And it happened in front of cameras because only local news cameras were permitted in the room that day. The question from the prosecutor was direct and simple. Did you hit your son Charlie V with a PVC pipe? Yes. One word. The same flat delivery as that moment on Nancy Grace when he said what? But this time in the opposite direction. This time not performing shock. This time admitting truth that he had denied for months. The defense attorney tried one last maneuver in that moment. He tried to reframe the admission by suggesting his client had been disciplining the boy rather than assaulting him. The prosecutor pushed back immediately. He used it to assault him. He hit him with it. Correct. He disciplined him and he hit him with it, the defense attorney said. The court moved forward with the plea. Charlie Bothel IV walked out of that courtroom not with a life sentence but with probation. The man who had hidden his abused son in a basement for 11 days, who had reported him missing to police, who had gone door to door in his neighborhood performing grief, who had sat on live national television while his son was underground in his house, received a term of probation for fourth-degree child abuse. The lawsuit against Nancy Grace. If you thought this story could not take another turn, here is what happened next. Charlie Bothel IV sued Nancy Grace. By the time the lawsuit was filed, he had lost his job as a registered nurse. He had a criminal record. He and Monique had separated. He was reportedly living with family in West Bloomfield. His life, as he described it in the complaint, had been irreparably destroyed. The lawsuit alleged that Nancy Grace and her network had broadcast false information about him. It claimed that her coverage had accused him of the most heinous possible crime, long-standing torture of his minor child. It argued that his reputation, his economic opportunities, his mental and emotional well-being, and his family had all been harmed by what he called malicious and reckless defamation. The lawsuit specifically objected to language used on the broadcast describing markings on the boy's body that corresponded to a PVC pipe used by the father. There is an extraordinary irony embedded in that complaint. The man who had appeared on Nancy Grace voluntarily, who had used her platform to perform the role of a searching father, was now suing that same platform for covering the aftermath of what he had done. And 1 month before the lawsuit was filed, in open court, Charlie Bothel IV had answered yes to the question of whether he had hit his son with a PVC pipe. The lawsuit faced an obvious and immediate problem. You cannot sue someone for defamation for saying you beat your child with a PVC pipe when you have already admitted in court that you beat your child with a PVC pipe. What this case actually means. Let us be clear about what actually happened here from beginning to end. A 12-year-old boy was being physically abused inside his own home. At some point, that abuse resulted in blood in his bedroom and blood on his clothing. Rather than seek medical help for the child, rather than stop what was happening, the adults in that home made a decision. They hid the boy in the basement, in a concealed area that the boy himself could not have built. Then they called the police and reported him missing. For 11 days, police searched. The FBI searched. Cadaver dogs searched. The neighborhood searched. And the father was visible throughout all of it, knocking on doors, speaking to cameras, performing concern, performing desperation, performing the role of a parent who had lost a child. When investigators finally entered that home with a full search warrant, they found the boy hidden underground, alive, bruised, bearing the physical marks of what had been done to him, in the same basement where his father was growing marijuana. In a space he could not have constructed himself. The boy later told investigators that his father hit him regularly with a PVC pipe, that it was his stepmother who ordered him to stay hidden. Not a runaway, not a child exercising independence. A child being held and hidden by the adults who were supposed to protect him. And the father, after pleading guilty in open court to hitting his son with a pipe, after receiving probation rather than a life sentence, had the audacity to file a lawsuit claiming that television coverage of his case had ruined his life. Charlie Bothel V survived this. He got out of that basement. He got out of that house. Whatever came after those 11 days and the years that led up to them, he made it out alive. And that matters. But the system that was supposed to protect him, the system that searched that house multiple times and found nothing, the system that accepted a plea deal that sent a man home on probation for what had been done to a child, that is a part of this story too. And it deserves to be said out loud. If the story moved you, if it made you angry in the way that cases like this should make people angry, share this video right now. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment in this case stopped you completely cold. Tell me what you think about that one word yes in that courtroom. Tell me what you think about the Nancy Grace moment. Tell me what you believe was really happening in that house during those 11 days. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications turned on. Every case we cover is a real person, a real story, and a real system that was either working or failing around them. And we do not look away from either one. This is Black Veil Crime Files. I will see you in the next one. Black Heart.